Shabbat Shalom. I'm Cantor David Proser of Kempsville Conservative Synagogue, Kehillat Bet HaMidrash, and this is our Torah portion explanation for Shabbat of July 25th, 2020, corresponding to the fourth day of Menachem of 5780. We are recording from the sanctuary of Kehillat Bet HaMidrash, where we have resumed holding Shabbat services on Saturday morning with limited seating and appropriate distancing. We thank Rabbi Joseph Prauser, Rabbi Joyce Newmark, Rabbi Michael Gold, Rabbi Adam Rosenbaum, and my friend and colleague, Rabbi Michael Panitz, as well as the United Synagogue Torah Sparks series for their various teachings and interpretations on this week's Parsha. This Shabbat, July 25th, 2020, we read the first Parsha in the fifth book of the Torah. The name Devarim refers both to this first Parsha as well as to the entire fifth book. Parshiot Devarim begins on page 981 of the Eitz Chaim Chumash and page 736 of the Hertz. Both its Greek name, Deuteronomy, meaning second telling, and its classical Hebrew designation, Mishnah Torah, a repetition of the Torah, aptly describe both the fifth book of the Torah and this opening Parsha. In a more direct interpretation of the Hebrew name, Devarim, which translates to words, this book constitutes one powerful and sustained verbal presentation from Moshe to the people. The entire book consists of Moshe's farewell speech and final instructions to the people that he has led for 40 years. It contains an overview of the history of the wilderness years, a review and elaboration of the statutes and ordinances of the Torah, his final blessings, and his death. In his first oration or discourse to the Israelite nation in this first Parsha, Moshe recaps much of the people's earlier experiences and the lessons that have come from their journey. This begins with God's command to the Israelites at Horeb to make their way to Canaan to take possession of the land. Moshe recalls the burden of leadership and his resulting appointment of judges and chieftains to share in the day-to-day leadership of the nation. He further recalls the journey from Horeb through Amorite territory to Kadesh, where spies were dispatched to the Promised Land. The story differs slightly from the original in the book of Numbers. In this telling, the Israelites asked God for permission to send spies into the land. In the book of Numbers, God commands the Israelites to send in the spies. In both versions, 10 spies return with a faithless and pessimistic majority report about the prospect of success in conquering the land. God punishes the entire generation, telling them that they will wander for 40 years until that current generation dies off. Only Joshua and Caleb, the two dissenting optimists among the spies, are duly rewarded. They, alone of their generation, are to be permitted entry to the land, where Caleb will receive an allotment and Joshua will assume national leadership. Moshe, too, is denied entry to Canaan. This divine decree requires the Israelites to follow a tortuous circuitous route through the wilderness, involving confrontations with the nations of Edom, Ammon, and Moab. The crushing Amorite defeat of the Israelites at Hormah is recalled. Other encounters with hostile foreign powers include more recent ones, such as those with Sichon and Og. Sichon of Heshbon refuses Israel permission to traverse his territory, despite Israel's friendly diplomatic request. Israel is compelled to battle both Sichon the Amorite and Og of Bashan, overcoming each and seizing their lands. After conquering these kings, the Israelites are encamped on the steppes of Moab, on the eastern shore of the Jordan River. They are close enough to look out into the Holy Land. The beginning of the allotment of tribal portions in conjunction with the conquest is recapped. The tribes of Reuven, Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh are appointed choice pasture lands in the conquered territory, as earlier explained, in the land east of the Jordan. Their territorial grant is conditioned upon their participation in the national military defense as shock troops, the vanguard of the conquest. This generation is far more ready and willing to follow God's instructions, and thus is deemed ready to enter the promised land. Parshiot Devarim concludes with Moshe retelling his appointment of Joshua as his successor and his charge to his protege not to fear the kings, powers, and forces he encounters in bringing about the conquest, for it is the Lord your God who will battle for you. This portion is read every year on Shabbat Chazon, the Shabbat before the fast of Tisha B'Av. The Haftorah for this Shabbat is from the book of Isaiah, chapter 1, verses 1 to 27, beginning on page 1000 of the Eitz Chaim Chumash and page 750 of the Hertz. Just as in the past 2 weeks, this Haftorah is not connected to today's Torah portion of Devarim by theme. Rather, it was chosen as the third of 3 prophetic readings of rebuke for the 3 weeks that precede Tisha B'Av. This Haftorah is always read on the Shabbat preceding Tisha B'Av, the fast of the 9th day of the Hebrew month of Av, the anniversary of the fall of Jerusalem, both at the hands of the Babylonians and 6 centuries later at the hands of the Romans. For this Shabbat, the opening chapter of Isaiah, which contains the great arraignment of Judah, has been selected as the Haftorah, in order to warn all generations in Israel of the moral and social transgressions that led to the downfall of the Jewish state. It is also from the first words of this Haftorah, Chazan Yeshayahu, the vision of Isaiah, that this Shabbat came to be known as Shabbat Chazon, the Shabbat of vision, the Shabbat before Tisha B'Av. Though chapter 1 is not the earliest of Isaiah's prophecy, its choice as the opening of the book is most appropriate. It strikes the fundamental notes of Isaiah's teachings and at the same time indicates the general line of prophetic doctrine with a force and clearness unsurpassed in Scripture. Now, even though the Torah to Haftorah connection is mainly calendar-wise, there is one direct connection between them. The word echa, meaning how, or how can it be? In the Torah reading, Moshe says, Eicha esa levadi, how can I bear the burden alone? In the Haftorah, Isaiah says, Eicha haita lezona, how has the city become as a harlot? And in the book of Eicha, Lamentations, that we will read the eve of Tisha B'Av, the prophet Jeremiah says, Eicha yashva bedad, how has she, meaning Jerusalem, sat alone? In each case, Eicha comes as an echo of disappointment, sadness, and lamentation. Eicha is both a question and an exclamation, expressing the contrast between what was previously and what each one is currently witnessing. Eicha calls upon us to look in the mirror and accept responsibility for our actions, and teaches us not just to lament our failings, but to learn, to grow, and to move on in order to find new meaning in our lives, even in our suffering. Shabbat Shalom, good Shabbos, and thank you for watching.